Well, people are still joining, but it is 12 o'clock or 7 o'clock in Australia and 10 a.m. and UK and wherever else everybody is. So maybe we should get started. Joy, what do you think? And people can continue to join.
Could do, yes. I see Peter there too, who was on our tour. Yeah. All right. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Joy Heylen, for those that don't know me. And I took up being a rep for Christian Friends of Israel several years ago now. And
Christian Friends of Israeli Communities.
That's right. Sorry. But I took it up because I knew that many Christians were unaware of the biblical and strategic importance of Judea and Samaria, otherwise known as the West Bank, unfortunately, but we always call it Judea, Samaria. And probably you do all know CFOIC was founded many decades ago, 1995. And Sondra is just a wonderful spokesperson to raise awareness amongst Christians of Judea, Samaria, and some of the challenges that the residents there can face with unfriendly neighbours, as you know, and even their own leftist Supreme Court. But yeah, Sondra's is one of few Jewish organisations based in Judea, Samaria that reaches out to Christians. And many of us have been to visit her out there in her humble little offices in Kanai Shomron, and just feel we're meeting the real Israel and the real Israelis when we go out there. And you probably know there's over 80% of our Bible is located in that area. So it's very, very historically and biblically important to know about. So yes, as I said before, Sondra and I felt to do this because she's meant to be heading off to America tonight, later tonight, and wasn't going to be able to speak for a few weeks if we didn't do it now. But as we know, there's going to be much for Sondra to share on just the current situation, which is not only missiles flying over from Gaza, but also a lot of internal unrest, as you probably know. But a miracle really, Sondra, some of us feel that given you've had over 4,000 rockets, that there's been such minimal loss of life, and even in Gaza, minimal loss of life given what Israel has had to do. And of course, most of you know that Israel does everything she possibly can to avoid civilian casualties, even of the international press. I don't know about that, but yeah, I'll pass it over to you, Sondra, because I'm sure we're all bursting to hear what you have to say.
Okay, Joy, thank you very much for that lovely introduction. So, you know, when Joy and I first talked about doing this meeting, we didn't realize how much there would be to talk about. And unfortunately, it has been really crazy this past week and a half or so. Yeah, about week and a half to 2 weeks. But I want to kind of step back a little bit and put what's going on a little bit in perspective. We're in Judea and Samaria. I'm in Samaria. I'm speaking to you from my home in Karnei Shomron. And we're in a part of Israel that the world often refers to as the West Bank. Many people all over the world believe that we don't belong here. We're here illegally. And, you know, there's so many ways to discuss and justify our presence here. And actually, I get very tired of doing this because how many people have to justify their presence in their own country. And we're talking about countries, talk about so many of you are from Australia. Goodness, your country is as a baby, you know? What are you, 200 some years old? I don't know. You're babies. And no one has ever asked any of you to justify the fact that you're Aussies, okay? And here in Israel, we're in a country that we go back thousands of years. No other country, maybe China, you know, can talk about that kind of history. And, you know, and we were expelled from our land, tortured, persecuted. The Romans and, you know, were the big culprits, you know, for 2,000 years ago. And yet we always kept in mind and our hopes and our prayers that we were going to come back to Israel. And there were always some Jews in Israel. So it's not like, you know, an empire came in, drove us away, and we disappeared. We never disappeared. And of course, with the establishment of the state of Israel, it became so much easier for Jews to come back. And we have literally reestablished our land. Now, why do I say all that? Because that's a very important part of this whole piece, okay? When we look at what's happening today, very often people assume that this is a minor border dispute, okay? And if, those Israelis and the Palestinians could just get together, sit across the table from another, so you'll move the line a few miles this direction or a few miles that direction, and everything will be good. Well, anybody who says that has no real understanding of what's going on here, not on the Jewish side, certainly not on the Arab side, okay? So if we look at what happened here just this last 2 weeks, first of all, we're in the middle of the Muslim Ramadan. Ramadan is a holy month for Muslims during which for an entire month they fast from sun up to sunset. And this is a holiday that follows the lunar calendar, which means it moves around the solar calendar. So there are years when Ramadan falls in the summer, and there's years when Ramadan falls in the winter. And so this year, Ramadan falls in the end of the spring, beginning of the summer, which means very long days. These people are fasting for 30 days, 29 days, something like that, from sun up, which is, let's say, before 6 in the morning, let's say about 5:30 in the morning, and the sun doesn't set until about 7:30 at night, or, you know, so this is a very long time. Now, first of all, people who are fasting are in bad moods. They're very irritable, okay? Second of all, when you're in a holy month, and if a significant segment of Islam today, not everybody, but a significant segment of Islam today is a very radical form of Islam. During Ramadan, they're hungry, irritable, and they go to the mosque much more often than usual. And where do they hear in the mosque? You know, the importance of the Islam must conquer the world, and of course must conquer the Middle East. And these are the normal messages. So when you're in a Ramadan month, you are in a situation where your Arab population is being excited in all the wrong directions, okay? And they're being incited to do things, to be violent, to do jihad, you know, whatever. This is the background. Now, if you look at the news today as it's being reported in many, many international outlets, you will see that they will tell the following narrative. This all began when the Supreme Court of Israel, it's very interesting, Joy, you referred to the leftist Supreme Court. It is very often left-wing, but every so often it rules right, okay? The Supreme Court of Israel, after years of litigation, ruled that a number of homes where Arabs have been living in a section of Jerusalem very close to the old city, in what is usually called East Jerusalem. It's an area that is referred to in Arabic as Sheikh Jarrah, and it is in Hebrew referred to as Shimon HaTzadik. Why? Shimon the righteous, Simeon the righteous. Who is Simeon the righteous? He was a rabbi that lived about 2,000 years ago, and his tomb is there. He was buried in Jerusalem. He lived in Jerusalem. He was part of the Council of Rabbis in Jerusalem, and he was buried in Jerusalem. But at least that's the tradition. And there were always Jews living in this area, but certainly going back to the Ottoman Empire, Jews came here from Yemen, they came here from Europe, and they bought property. And they lived here in homes in this community, in this neighborhood, just north of the old city. And you know what happened? In 1948, along came the Arabs, the Jordanian Legion, all these people attacked, and the British actually forced these people to leave their homes. And then the Jordanians captured the area and would not let any Jews back in. And so Jews who had purchased homes and lived in this neighborhood until 1948 were violently removed from their homes, and it was occupied by Jordan. Now, but Jews own the land. In fact, Jews are the recorded owners of this land. And over the years, okay, for a while nobody did anything, but in recent, going back at least 10 years, Jews started to sue, to repossess the property. Finally, and over the years, some of the apartments, some of the buildings were actually evacuated from the Arabs who were trespassers, who were illegally trespassing on this property, living there free, okay? And they were squatters, and they were squatters that Jordan had invited in, okay? It was very interesting because if you go look in the way the property was registered in Jordan, it was registered as Jewish property. That while they occupied it, they wanted the Palestinians to come in, but they never erased the actual title to this property that was Jewish property. Anyway, so the Supreme Court, about 2 weeks ago, ruled that these families, these last families that were in these homes, have to be evacuated. It's legal. They don't own it. They have no rights to it. And that was the excuse that was used to start all this violence. Now, I ask you, Jews come back to the land of Israel. We were violently thrown out 2,000 years ago. We were persecuted and kept out over the centuries, and we come back. Isn't it legitimate that it's ours? We come back, we reclaim our land. But here we're talking about property that was actually purchased by Jews only about 100 years ago, a little more than 100 years ago, registered in modern land registries as belonging to Jews, and they want their property back. Now, another thing that happened during Ramadan, already on the Temple Mount and in the entrances to Jerusalem, particularly around Damascus Gate, we started seeing a lot of violence. We saw Arabs starting to attack Jews, Jews just walking along the streets. They were getting beat up. Then you had Arabs getting on the light rail in Jerusalem. And this was amazing. You'd have a group of Arabs, one's holding a cell phone and filming. The others go over to some Jew sitting there on a bench in the light rail. Now, particularly a Jew who was religious, so he'd have a kippah, or he would in some way look very Jewish. These became the prime targets. And so the Arabs would go up, start beating them up, and a guy standing there with a cell phone taking a picture, and then he puts it out on TikTok. I don't know what TikTok is. I don't know if any of you know what it is. I mean, I've heard of it, but I've never used it. But it seems this today is one of the most popular social media vehicles that are being used by young people all over the world. And so this is spreading anti-Semitism because these Arabs are saying, look what we did. We beat up a Jew. Yay. And this is spreading all over Europe, where we have Arabs, particularly Muslims all over Europe. They're saying, rah, 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 go get them. Go get them. So if we don't have enough with the imams in the mosques riling up these people, we have the TikTok people, okay, all over the world, the Muslims saying, go get them, go get them. Well, this is going to bring us to a boiling point. They come up to the Temple Mount. Now, the police are around the Temple Mount to keep law and order, but the Arabs have free access. Thousands of them are on the Temple Mount for the evening prayers, and this becomes a powder keg. The Arabs start rioting on their own mosque. It's insane. I don't know. I can't understand it. We go into a synagogue. The last thing we would do is be violent in our own home of prayer. And yet this is what they're doing. They're throwing rocks and they're rioting, and then they're rioting in different places. And this is how it began. It was in Jerusalem. At the same time, we started seeing violence in Judea and Samaria. There are two young men at a bus stop in Samaria at the Tappuach Junction, waiting for a bus to take them to their school. They learn in a yeshiva in a Bible school. It's a post-high school Bible school, and they usually study there for a year, maybe 2 years, and then they go into the army between high school and their military service. And they're waiting there at a bus stop. An Arab car drives by, opens the window, shoots, kills one immediately. The other one is seriously injured. Okay, and this happens here. The same day, this is 2 weeks ago, the same day, in Gush Etzion, in Judea, there are a number of Arabs that attempt to stab soldiers, passersby. So we're already seeing a number of events beginning to bubble in Jerusalem, in Judea and Samaria. It's only a matter of time till Hamas in Gaza takes up the lead. And they start firing rockets into Israel. Initially, just into the areas closest to Gaza, Sderot and some of the kibbutz and moshav settlements right nearby. They're firing artillery and they're firing rockets. And what are they saying? We are doing this to redeem Jerusalem, to redeem Al-Aqsa. Now, think about this for a second. And the other thing they're saying is we're doing this in defense of those poor Arabs who are being violently thrown out of their homes in Sheikh Jarrah. Their homes? They have been illegal trespassers by law. Every document proves this by law. In fact, very interesting. Google this. Syrian blogger Sheikh Jarrah, or Syrian blogger Jerusalem. I saw this. It's amazing. It's a Syrian woman, but I think she doesn't live in Syria. From the way it looks on the phone, she lives in the United States or Canada or someplace else, okay? And she posts this blog where she, in Arabic, and I saw it with a Hebrew translation, but it might have an English translation as well, probably does. And she's speaking in Arabic, giving the truth about Sheikh Jarrah, and it's amazing because she supports us 100%. She, as a Syrian Arab Muslim, is reaching out to other Muslims and saying, you're wrong. You're wrong. The property belongs to Jews. But anyway, this but Gaza, Hamas, wow, this is great. This is great stuff. And so they start firing rockets, and they're coming to the defense of the poor Palestinians who are being thrown out of their homes in Sheikh Jarrah, who are being limited because their police watching, keeping law and order on the Temple Mount. That's terrible. We have to redeem. The Temple Mount, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Okay. Now, we've seen these kind of violence before, and it's very unpleasant. We're taking out now on Sunday, just over a week ago on Sunday, was Jerusalem Day. And Jerusalem Day is a very, very festive holiday. It's the anniversary of the date that Jerusalem was liberated in the 1967 war. Okay, so it's a very, very special time. We are now 54 years later, and it's always a celebration. And traditionally, there's a big dance, march kind of thing, where young people come from all over the country, and they march with flags and they dance, and there's always like loudspeakers along the way with music, and they dance and sing down to the old city. And they go into the old city, and they end up at the Kotel, at the Western Wall. Well, Sunday was already, things were getting very violent in and around Jerusalem. The police said, we can still protect this march. It can go forward. And at the very last minute, when they were already sending rockets, already at that point, they said, you know what? We're going to cancel it. We're going to cancel this march down to the wall. But of course, many had already gone. There were still a few people at the wall. But this became one more thing that Gaza and the Hamas and the Arabs were going to blame Israel for. Oh, look at them. They're in this march to occupy Jerusalem, as if we're not already in Jerusalem, as if Jerusalem isn't our ancient capital. Sunday night, the rockets start to hit not only near Gaza, but all over. They begin to fire to Tel Aviv and to Jerusalem, okay? And particularly on Monday. Monday, the rockets really go all over Israel. We have sirens going off in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, in all kinds of places that usually don't get rockets, okay? I have to tell you, Tuesday night, we had a wedding. Monday night, We had a wedding of my niece. It was a very precious wedding for us and the family. And the wedding was located outside Jerusalem, in the hills of Jerusalem, just to the west of Jerusalem. To those of you who are familiar with the Jerusalem-Tel Aviv highway, so picture yourself leaving Jerusalem and you're going down the hills, and there's those big hills just on the sides of the road. Up there in one of those hills is where the wedding was, okay? Monday night, a missile fell right near that wedding place in a nearby community, and a house was damaged. Luckily, nobody was hurt. It had landed actually in an open field, but it was very close to a house, and the house was damaged. The next night we had the wedding, and there were sirens going off all over the country, and there were no sirens in that area. And we really believed that God wanted this wedding to go forward, that he had put his protection over us. And it was just amazing. That night, we drove back from the wedding home and arrived right near our community just around midnight. About 5 minutes before we entered our community, driving along the road, all of a sudden I see arcs of fire coming out from to the right of me, over me, and they land in front of me. I immediately slowed down and actually stopped. There was a bus in front of me. 4 Molotov cocktails were thrown at the bus and at my car, miraculously landed in between the bus and the car. I saw the arc of flames in the air in enough time that I could slow down and stop. The bus kept going so that the Molotov cocktails landed on the road in the space between the bus and my car. And they landed 2 to the right of me, 2 to the left of me, leaving a clear space in the middle of the road to go through, and I was able to drive through unharmed. We immediately called our security patrol, and they, within seconds, the Army called us 3 different times to get as much information as they could, because they were going to go out and look for the terrorists who had thrown the Molotov cocktails. Actually, it just as an aside, they called at one point and they said, "Do you have a camera in your car?" Well, I have a camera. My car came with this camera thing that I never loaded it with the proper SD card. I never put it out. I don't know anything about it. You know, when something gets too technological, I say, "Oh, leave me alone." So I had no camera footage to show them, and they were asking me if we had camera footage. And I realized at that point, they're flying blind. You know, we have done so much at CFOIC raising money for cameras all over the place, but I guess in this particular area, we didn't yet put up cameras. And so they were asking me in my little car, did I have a little camera in the car that would have captured this so they could immediately take a look at it and get a better idea of how to get these terrorists. But I'm sorry, but I could not help them. Anyway, so and so that was Tuesday night. And that same night, though, it turns out, while we were at the wedding, sirens went off in Karnei Shomron. Now, sirens never go off in Karnei Shomron. Never. It was so far from Gaza. And went off, and our grandchildren, we have 2 children who live in this community, so my kids were at the wedding, but their children were home with babysitters. They were, quickly got into their shelters luckily they have newer apartments and they have shelters in their apartments. So they were all there in the middle of the night, had to go in. And that was kind of scary, but we kept saying, okay, it was a mistake. They couldn't have reached this far. No, we're too far from Gaza. It couldn't happen. Well, all week long, there's lots and lots of sirens all over, but we didn't have any sirens. This past Saturday afternoon on Shabbat, behind me, you see the trees here. I have a patio out there. Shabbat afternoon, I am sitting out on my patio. We've finished lunch. We're just relaxing. It's such a wonderful day of relaxation. I'm sitting out there on an easy chair, enjoying the breeze, and a siren goes off. Unbelievably loud. Oh my God. Now there's a shelter here. We're older houses. So here they built shelters on the roads, different places. To get there, I'd have to go a few houses down. It's not that far, but I also had my mother here, and she's 87, and there was no way she was going to make it into the shelter. So they say your second best thing is to go under your stairs, because the way stairs are built here, They're poured concrete, and it is the safest kind of a structure. It's not concrete blocks, it's poured concrete, much more solid, and the kind of thing that would protect you. So I have a closet under the stairs. So we went into the closet. And of course, the closet is full of stuff, like folding chairs. We pulled out the folding chairs, went into the closet and stood there, and then we heard booms, a loud boom. Well, it turns out a rocket landed in the valley just next to our community. And we all of a sudden realized that the Hamas in Gaza has so improved their capabilities that their rockets are able to come here. They were never able to come this far before, and now they were. That night, Saturday night, there were two different, at about 11 o'clock or 11:30 at night, Hamas put out an announcement, we are going to be bombing central Israel at midnight. I looked at my husband and I said, well, what do you think? Should we stay up? Nah, they got here once, they're not going to get here again, okay? So we went to bed. Just as we were about to doze off, it was already about midnight. Sure enough, sirens went off. 2 sirens went off that night. Now, it turns out we heard milder booms that night, and that means what we were hearing was the Iron Dome shooting those rockets in the air before they were able to land. Now, thank God of all of this, nobody was hurt, thank God. And indeed, for most of these rocket attacks, the Iron Dome is catching them and nobody is hurt. But unfortunately, there have been direct hits. People have been killed, including children. There was one situation that in most cases, when people are in their shelters or in their safe rooms, they are protected. There was one bizarre case that the direction of a piece of shrapnel from a missile came at a particular angle and a particular speed that it penetrated the metal window cover, of a shelter, and a little boy, 5-year-old boy was killed. Tragic. So it's been a very difficult time, and I have to say, thank God we're in an area where we've had just total of 4 sirens here, and 3 were on Saturday, 1 was last Tuesday, and yes, we can have them again, but we can't compare what we're dealing with what the people in the South are dealing with, who are living in their shelters because there are sirens going all day and all night as they keep firing these rockets, which is just insane. Now, on top of all of that, and perhaps one of the things that is of greatest concern to us today is the effect that all of this has had on what we call Israeli Arabs. Now, just to kind of give you background, because not everybody realizes the difference. The Arabs who live here in Judea and Samaria, they call themselves Palestinians. They are not Israeli citizens. They are not Israeli citizens because the area of Judea and Samaria was never really annexed by Israel. And it's been it's administered by Israel, it's controlled by Israel, but it's in this in-between status. There's a lot of hesitation, of course, to annex the whole area, if that means we would have to give all of these, 2.5 or even 3 million Arabs citizenship. Since Oslo, the area has been divided so that every place the Jews live are under Israeli control, and of course Jews like me and Israelis, we retain our citizenship living here, and the communities are under Israeli control, but they still have not been annexed. And the Arabs living in most of Judea and Samaria are under the jurisdiction of the Palestinian Authority, which is not a state, although they would like to be a state, but it functions in many ways as an autonomy. And these people, though, the Palestinians are under the jurisdiction of the Palestinian Authority, okay? However, in Israel itself, in the parts of Israel that are not Judea and Samaria, the parts of Israel that have been part of the country since 1948, and that the whole world recognizes as Israel, there we have about 1 million Arabs, okay? About 20% of or even more than 20% of Israel's population, of Israel's citizen population, are Arabs. And we call them Israeli Arabs. They are Israeli citizens. They have 100% the same rights as all Jewish Israelis, but they're Arabs. And many of them, even most of them, live in Arab villages, where they always lived. So you'll have Jewish communities and have Arab communities. But there are a number of cities that are totally integrated. Haifa, Lod, Ramle, Akko are just a few of them. These are cities. Jaffa, for example, Jaffa is part of Tel Aviv, but the Jaffa part of Tel Aviv, okay, is a mixed area. Arabs that have always lived there, plus Jews, some of whom have lived there also for many years, for decades. Some of them came to Israel between 1948 and 1950, part of the new immigrants that came in after the state of Israel. And some of them moved there more recently. And this is where we're seeing some of the most frightening occurrences. Because these are people literally in a block of flats, in an apartment building. You'll have 10 apartments. Half of them will be Jews and half of them will be Arabs. The Arabs in these apartment buildings who are neighbors with Jews, who are the people that the Jews would go and knock on the door, or the Arabs would knock on the Jewish door. Do you have an extra cup of flour? Short eggs. Literally neighbors. You see someone going up with the groceries, you help them out. Jews help Arabs, Arab help Jews. Neighbors, like anything. And then all of a sudden, these same people are linking up with the Hamas, linking up with the Palestinians, and are beating up, lynching. There was a fellow who was literally lynched in Lod at the beginning of all this last week and died yesterday from his injuries. It was a head injury, and in the end, he just, all the systems shut down. He was brain dead, and then everything shut down. Terrible, terrible tragedy. It is frightening. My niece lives in Lod. She and her husband, they're a young couple that just got married a couple of years ago. A young couple, they moved to Lod. They are part of quite a network of young Orthodox Jews who have moved to Lod. Why? Because the Jews that were living in Lod all these years were beginning to feel, on the one hand, very overpowered by a growing Arab community that sometimes made them feel uncomfortable. And on the other hand, they tended to be very poor Jewish communities. They came from traditional backgrounds, but they had lost touch with their religious roots. And so these Jews came in, young Jews came in to give encouragement, to educate the youngsters, and to help bring them out of poverty. It was a very poor area. And they've done amazing work. And they've moved into these places, and we've revived the synagogues and built new synagogues, and they've done wonderful, wonderful work. But they didn't come in hostile to the Arabs. They came in to be part of the fabric of the community and really help to create positive relationships between Jews and Arabs in this area. At the same time, strengthening the spiritual sustenance, shall we say, of the Jews living there. All of a sudden, the Arabs there are saying, these people are settlers. Settlers? Jewish Israeli citizens, no, they call settlers, they say, oh, anybody who lives in Judea and Samaria, you don't belong there, so you're a settler. Now, the young Jews, Orthodox Jews who are coming to live in Lod, that's also a settler? And now, all of a sudden, the penny is starting to drop. And more of the media are walking around, with their microphones, and they see these young Arabs in these cities, in Haifa and Lod, and they're asking them, why are you being violent at your Arab neighbors? At your Jewish neighbors? Did these Jewish neighbors ever harm you? Didn't you have nice relations? And you know what they say? We want them out of here. We want them out of here. And the interviewer says, what do you mean you want them out of here? He says, there will be no more Israel. Israel's on its way out. We want all the Jews out of here. These statements are being made by Arabs who are Israeli citizens, who were born in the state of Israel, who have received all the benefits of education, democracy, freedom of religious expression. There are mosques all over the place in these cities, and they go to the mosques, and the muezzin has the call to prayer, and nobody bothers them, and everything, they have all this freedom. And now all of a sudden they're saying out loud what it seems many of them were saying all along, but they hid it inside them. Now they're saying it. We don't want the Jews here. We want to get rid of them. And we see now And it's created a, shall we say, a network of solidarity. The Palestinians in Judea and Samaria, the Arabs in East Jerusalem, the Israeli Arabs in the Galilee and in places like Lod and Ramlah. All of these people are beginning to identify under one mantra. We want to get rid of the Jews. Palestine is ours. Now there are people, and this is the conversation today in Israel. Where do we go from here? We know how to fight Hamas. Many of us say, Israel stops too soon. Maybe they need to be more effective. Some people say we need to go in and recapture the Gaza Strip. It's not so simple. We know we could capture the Gaza Strip, but the question is then what do you do with it? These are people that are not to be reasoned with. We'll be dealing with the terrorists there for a very long time. There's a lot of questions. But when you're dealing with Arabs who are over there or are your enemies or are, in specific places, they are not your citizens, you deal with them militarily, with intelligence, whatever. What do you do with the Arabs that are a fifth column within your own country, who are equal citizens, and identifying them? And I have to say this, there are Arabs who don't agree with that. There are Arabs who are very upset with the actions, the violence, and the statements of some of these people and saying, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? We want to live and do coexistence. You are ruining decades of quiet and careful work to build coexistence. And so there are Arabs who are still very committed to peaceful coexistence. But the question is how many and who is the majority and what is really going on. And this, unfortunately, are the issues that we as a country are dealing with. Now, I'll just conclude with one more short update, and then we'll open this up to questions about elections. So until last Sunday, until about 9 or 10 days ago, the biggest topic of conversation is, will we have a government? We had elections in March, and first Netanyahu was given the opportunity to make a government. He wasn't able to. And the reason he wasn't able to, even though there is a solid majority of right-wing members of Knesset, but because Netanyahu over the years who has alienated and frankly terribly mistreated anyone within his party or one among the other right-wing parties that he sees might become too powerful, he has alienated them and even mistreated them. And so you now have a situation where there are two right-wing parties who will refuse to be part of a government that Netanyahu is prime minister of, and another party, Bennett's party, who is willing to go with either side so long as there's a government and so long as he can advance, at least to some extent, right-wing agendas. Both sides, both Netanyahu and the other group, were negotiating and were about to include an Arab party for the first time in the government. Ra'am is the name of that party, because the head of that party, Mansour Abbas, has made some wonderful statements. And in fact, he just said recently, I want to go and help rebuild the synagogue that was burnt down in Lod by Arabs. And he's against violence. The problem is, do we believe him? This is a representative of the Islamic movement, okay? Do we believe him that he indeed is a very strong Muslim, but he believes in peaceful coexistence with Israel, that he has changed his tune, that he is no longer in favor of violence? This is a huge question, because we are all in favor of coexistence with our Arab neighbors, if indeed they want coexistence. But we don't want to open the door to Arabs who pretend to be in favor of peaceful coexistence, and it will end up being a fifth column and undermining the safety and security of the people of Israel. So right now, because of all this violence, all of the idea of Ra'am coming into any of these governments is kind of dropped off the table, which means that neither side could put together a government unless something happens. There's no question if Netanyahu were to resign, okay, and pave the way for someone else in the Likud to be the head of that party, there would be a solid right-wing government in 5 minutes. Because it's Netanyahu that's the problem. Not his policies, but his personality and the way he treats others, fellow politicians and etc. It is quite a complicated situation. I don't know. I can't begin to tell you how it's going to end. I really don't. But this is where we are now. And with that in mind, I think, given you a pretty thorough update, but I'd love to, see if anyone has any comments or questions. Joy, you want to let me know what's going on?
Well, I might just comment. I think most of us are weeping here, Sondra, for what you're having to endure. It is insane. It is insane. But many miracles, as I said before. I mean, with the amount of rockets you've had coming over, and that only 10, I mean, one is, a tragedy, but the fact that there's only been 10, and as I said, someone was commenting even on the casualties in Gaza, that given what you've had to do to try and stop this barrage, there should perhaps be more killed there, but you let them know. People probably know that you let them know, don't you, that they're coming
Yes.
in, and you do everything to avoid casualties, civilian casualties. But yes, I put in the chat, if you want to ask a question, you can use that little reaction button down the bottom of your screen to raise your hand, or just unmute now and put your questions to. John Lockwood was asking for the link to that Arab blogger. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'll find it and I'll send it. I have all of your emails. So, I mean, it's too difficult for me to get to it now, but I will send the link to the film to all of you that have joined today.
Yes.
Okay. Good.
Thank you.
Jane Castle has asked in chat, what can we say to increase understanding that Palestine is not a state?
Okay, so first of all, I think that if you go back to what I started with at the beginning, talking about these Arabs who were beating up Jews and then taking pictures and putting it out there. There is a direct correlation between what goes on here and what people see and talk about abroad. So in the same way that the Arabs were raising more anti-Semitism, particularly in Europe, in response to this, we can do the opposite, okay? So that's really when we have these kind of updates on Zoom and the information that we put out on a regular basis, we need you to spread that out. Whether you send it by email to everyone you know, or put it on Facebook, or I'm not an expert in all these various social medias, but even if each of us, we're putting these things on our platforms, particularly on Facebook and email and on our website, but every one of you can to increase our influence exponentially by putting it out, so that we can create an atmosphere around the world of people who are saying, no, this is not legitimate, that the Jews, and particularly, I look at this issue of Sheikh Jarrah. Jews came back to property that they owned, and this is being denied. And even you see the United States, which of course we have a new administration, an administration that is not anti-Israel, but it's certainly not nearly as supportive, certainly on some of these issues, as we had in the previous administration. So at the beginning of all of this, before the rockets were flying, the American administration said, come on, guys, why are you evicting poor Arabs out of Sheikh Jarrah? Okay? The message has to go out. It's the Arabs who are there illegally. Any country in the world is going to let trespassers prevent the rightful owners of property to get back their property? I mean, this makes no sense. So this has to go out there. But I would say even more so, when you take Sheikh Jarrah is just a microcosm of the whole issue. You say it's Palestine? It's not Palestine. It's Israel. It was always Israel. And the same way that you can recognize if people are thrown out of their land and someone trespasses, when they come back, you have to return the land to its rightful owner. That's the story of Israel. The Jewish people were wrongfully evicted from their land, and they've come back. And the United Nations recognized the state of Israel on this basis, returning the land to its rightful owners. So where does Palestine fit into this? It doesn't. It just doesn't. Now, none of us ever said we want to get rid of the Arabs and throw them out into the sea, unlike what they say about us. But live here as citizens, respect the fact that it's a Jewish state. You can still be Muslim. You can go to your mosques. You can do whatever you want, but it's a Jewish state. Respect it. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, that's not what we have today.
Helen has a question, but it is sad that up until now, there's many Arabs, and there probably still are, that are happy to live under Israeli rule, aren't they?
Yes.
They don't want to be under Hamas or Fatah. So it is just tragic that this spirit of delusion and violence has come on them. But as
I see Helen has a question.
Yes.
Yeah, look, it's not related, but I'm just curious about the situation in Israel, where we hear that everybody has to be vaccinated about this COVID. Is that true?
In Israel?
Compulsory. Yeah. Everybody.
Okay, no, there is no forced vaccinations. Everybody can make their own choice. However, and this is starting to change. However, there are places that are only open to people who have been vaccinated. For example, or if they don't have to be vaccinated, they have to take a test that shows that they don't have COVID. So, for example, if you're going to go to a hotel today in Israel, you either have to you have to have proof of vaccination, proof that you've already been sick with COVID, or you have to take a COVID test within, 48 or 72 hours or something like that, and show that as of that time you were clear of COVID. So you have that kind of stuff going on. But tourists are not yet allowed into the country. And when they are going to be allowed in, at least initially, they will have to prove either that they have had COVID or they've had the vaccine, and they will probably have to take some kind of serological test when they come in. And so if you have the antibodies, which you could have either if you were sick or if you had the vaccine, then you will be able to come in, and if not, you won't. Now, that won't be forever, but I do think it will be for the foreseeable future until we can say COVID has disappeared from all over the world. But let's hope that happens sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Sandy.
Is Jean Homer on? I can't. Jean did email some questions in. I'm not sure if she's here. Unmute, Jean, if you're here. Not hearing anything.
Okay.
Yeah. So maybe we can just email those answers.
Right.
Anyone else?
I see a comment from Roland Smith. Also, we can educate people that most Palestinians are the product of folk moving into Israel a couple of generations ago due to job opportunities. They are not native to the land. What do you think, Sondra? That is absolutely true. The problem is that I think we will all agree that when people are already third or fourth generation in a place, we shouldn't be throwing them out, okay? So we have to balance. We have to make sure people understand that when they see a Palestinian on television saying, this land was in my family for generations, hundreds of years, that's probably false, okay? On the other hand, they need to understand that anybody who's living here and who's been here for years, nobody is trying to throw them out. And that the Sheikh Jarrah is not about throwing Palestinians out. It's about reclaiming property to their rightful owners and getting rid of squatters. That's the issue. There's a wonderful, wonderful book called From Time Immemorial and if any of you are interested in really exploring the history of these so-called Palestinians, that is a wonderful, wonderful book, because what the author is Joan Peters, what she shows, and she passed away actually a few years ago. It's an old book, I think came out in the 70s or the 80s. And what she shows is she examines actual population records from the 19th century and the early 20th century. And she demonstrates that these people all came in after the British came into the country, and after the Zionist movement, when between the British and the Zionist movement, there were suddenly economic opportunities created here, and that's why they came in.
Can you see Joanna? Joanna has a hand up. Unmute, Joanna.
Yes, Joanna, let's hear you.
Yes, hi, Sondra. I'm from New Zealand. My question is it possible that Netanyahu can use this crisis for his own credibility and intervene in the process of forming a government and say the crisis conditions require a fifth election, and with a view to him garnering the Likud voters who basically stayed at home last election, and basically forcing the population to support him on the basis of I'm the only strongest person who can deal with a tough situation like this.
Okay, so first of all, if right now the mandate is in the hands of Yair Lapid, and he has not that much more time, another week or so, I think, maybe 2 weeks, to form a government. If he does not form a government, does not succeed, then we will go to fifth elections. Netanyahu doesn't have to do anything to go to fifth elections. However, nobody wants fifth elections. Nobody. Maybe Netanyahu does, but nobody wants them. It costs the government, costs the people of Israel enormously. And it is very clear that the same stalemate that was produced in the first 4 elections will come out in the 5th, because it is not the right-wing positions that are problems, it is Netanyahu. And so every election, more and more Likud voters stay home, or they vote for another party because they're disgusted. Now, Netanyahu, let me be very clear, he is so talented. He has been probably the best prime minister Israel has ever had, but he has let his ego get the best of him. And so both in the way he's treated other people, both in he's taken decisions. Like, one of the things that I'm most upset with him, we had 4 years of a Trump administration where basically the Americans were saying to Israel, do whatever you want, I don't care, with regard to Judea and Samaria. We had this amazing plan, and Netanyahu promised he was going to start the process of applying sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. He didn't do it. He didn't do it. Now, we have another thing that's even less of an issue politically, okay? There are quite a number of what they call young communities. These are small communities in Judea and Samaria that are often referred to as illegal outposts. What is illegal about them is a bureaucratic fact that the various politicians who have to actually sign their name and say it's legal haven't signed. Netanyahu has refused to legalize these communities. He has 100% of the power to do it. And all these years, he hasn't done it. Now, if he had done that, and there was no reason, he kept promising, every election he promised, and then he didn't do it, okay? And so we right-wing people look at that and we're saying, Netanyahu, why aren't you doing this? What game are you playing, okay? So the left, of course, is accusing Netanyahu of corruption and saying all these accusations against him. My attitude is I have no idea if those accusations are true or not. But I tell you one thing that has come out even more so in the trial that's now going on against him, that I was so upset about. But it makes sense because we could see that this is what was going on. One of the accusations against Netanyahu is that he did a deal with Walla, which was a major news internet site. And the owner of Walla also is the owner of Bezik, okay? And basically, he needed certain government approvals for the expansion of his communications network, empire, okay? And so he did a deal. Netanyahu said, I will give you the requisite permissions that you're looking for. you give me the kind of coverage I want. So until now, everyone's saying, okay, is that really a crime? Every politician jockeys for his own, but it turns out that what Netanyahu wanted was not just to make himself look good, but to make Bennett look bad. Bennett is the head of the party that most people like me support, religious Zionist party, which is to the right of the Likud. Very much, settlements, Jewish communities, Judean, all the way. And there's no reason in the world for Netanyahu to be fighting against Bennett, who's part of his own camp. And that's who he was fighting against. And so when you see things like this, you say, Netanyahu, it makes you cry. Such a talented man who accomplished so much for Israel and then lets his ego get in the way. This is the problem. And so this is why many people are saying Netanyahu has to go. Because there needs to be someone who can gather the people around a real ideology and a real policy that's for the good of Israel. And we would have an overwhelmingly right-wing majority in that case. Anyway, that's how it is. Where are we getting a red alert now?
Coming up to time that nobody else has mentioned Iran.
Yes.
Involvement in all of this. And like Rolly said, my red alert is going off while you've been speaking as well.
Okay, well, Iran is really, I'm so glad you brought that up, Joy, because what I was talking about really was the ideology that's behind where the Arabs are and what's driving their violence. But there is a very, there's a wonderful saying in Hebrew, and I'll say it in Hebrew, Im en kemach en Torah. If there is no flour, there is no Bible, there's no Torah. In other words, ideologies are all very good, but they need money. Okay, and that's what Iran has done. You have the Palestinians who are very much, they have an ideology. They want to get rid of Israel, right? But they could yell and scream and say, I want to get rid of Israel and accomplish nothing without the enormous funding that is poured into these areas from Iran, and not just from Iran, from Qatar, okay? So if we're looking at the missiles and all these things that are being shot against Israel, we have to see to a very large extent that Hamas is actually a proxy of Iran. They have another proxy that they're even closer to, and that's the Hezbollah in the north. And actually, today and yesterday, we've been hearing about minor sporadic attacks. In fact, last night, Hezbollah fired quite a great deal of artillery to northern Israel. Luckily, thank God, they landed in Lebanon. They didn't make it across the border, okay? So there is definitely rumbling going on up there. And again, that's an Iranian proxy. The biggest fear, though, from Iran is their nuclear capability, which under Trump, who pulled out from the agreement, and more important than pulling out of the agreement, reimposed sanctions on Iran, which meant that the Iran economy was being crippled and the pressure was on. And along comes Biden and says, Iran, let's have a chat. We can talk, we can be friends. And we look at what's going on, and this is a repeat of Obama. And one of the, and I really believe, I have to tell you, I do believe that Biden likes Israel. Unlike a large segment of the Democratic Party, who really does not like Israel and has influence on Biden, no question. Political influence. I think Biden likes Israel, but I think Biden is an idiot when it comes to understanding the danger that Iran poses. And if he thinks that he's going to now sit in Vienna and they're going to all have tea and they're going to have, come up with this wonderful agreement, our biggest fear is that they're going to, they're already talking about eliminating sanctions and all this kind of stuff. You don't eliminate sanctions. You get Iran where you want him, down and no nuclear capability whatsoever, then you can start thinking about eliminating sanctions. You don't do it as a way of bringing them to the table. because Iran will just use this to create to move itself, and that's what's happening, move itself faster towards nuclear capability. So Iran is a huge issue, and it's something that Israel has been in conversation with the Americans to try in whatever way possible to influence the outcome of the talks in Vienna. Again, this is something that we need international pressure to come on. Yes, Gordon.
Oh, thank you, Sondra. Thank you very much for this wonderful talk. It's really given us a background of what's really going on instead of the nonsense. But the thing, and I can see, you said you vote for Bennett. He really impresses me. He's given us a couple of talks here in Australia. And what do you think the chances are that he might be able to take over? And
Well,
thank
Bennett,
you, Sondra, for everything. It's 5 a.m. when it's noon where you are.
oh my goodness.
Well worth getting up to listen to you. Thank you for briefing us on what is really going on with Gaza. And on behalf of what's going on in the United States of America, I am very concerned that we in the United States of America must support Israel. And we do have our problems here, don't we?
Yes. Thank you, Richard. Richard is talking to us from Florida, as he said, 5 a.m. there. Thank you so much for participating. Look, there are a number of people have asked about who can replace Netanyahu. Bennett is not from the Likud right now. Bennett is someone who could have been in the Likud. He was chief of staff of the prime minister's office under Netanyahu, and bad blood happened there at some point, and from that point on, they have been at odds. Bennett is excellent. Ayelet Shaked is excellent. But there are also some very, very talented people in the Likud. Someone here in the chat, Joanna, you mentioned Nir Barkat. Nir Barkat is very talented. Look, Gideon Sa'ar was one of the most popular people in the Likud until Netanyahu effectively drove him out of the party. Then he came back into the party, and Netanyahu really made it very clear to all the other Likud, if you support Sa'ar, Gideon Sa'ar, you're gonna be at odds with me. And of course, Netanyahu is seen as very, very powerful. So these are the kinds of political machinations that really are problematic. But there are a lot of talented people.
Very well said, Sondra. I'm Israeli as well as American, and in Israel I was Likud, and here I don't mind telling you I'm a good Republican, and I support Israel, and I support the United States of America, of course, but I hope we all stay together and succeed in everything you're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Sondra?
Joy, what were you saying?
I put in chat, if anyone needs to go, please do so. But I know you're happy to stay on for a bit longer yet, Sondra. And there's two questions in chat.
Okay.
One from Cornelius. Could it be that Netanyahu did not decide for sovereignty over Judea and Samaria because this would be an obstacle for the Abraham Accords with Arab countries? And Barry has a question about Hezbollah on top of that.
Okay, so first of all, let me address the Abraham Accords. It is not at all clear what happened there. There were statements made that it was the United Arab Emirates that conditioned signing the Abraham Accords to freezing application of sovereignty. At that point, Netanyahu denied it, and there was nothing in the accords themselves that conditioned anything. Okay, it was just peace. In fact, Netanyahu bragged that the agreements that he signed with the United Arab Emirates and later with Bahrain did not condition peace. It was no land for peace. It was no anything for peace. It was just peace for peace. So it's not clear. It's not clear also if the problem was Jared Kushner, if the problem was Trump. I think if we look at Vice President Pence and Secretary of State Pompeo, both of them were extremely in favor of applying sovereignty. My sense is that it was a combination of a lot of things, and that Netanyahu could, I'm convinced, could have applied sovereignty in a very limited way in order to show that, you know, he's committed to this and he'll start with something small. And that was not done. Then Netanyahu said at one point that, yes, if I'm elected, I will apply sovereignty. And so that led me to suspect that he was delaying it in order to garner more votes from right-wing people. But in the meantime, Trump lost the election. And that was the tragedy. But it was predictable. I mean, nobody could have said he would lose, but nobody could have said he would win either, because the election was really neck and neck. And therefore, I was frustrated that he didn't at least realize that there was a chance, a good chance, that Trump would not continue, and therefore there would be no time to lose. We needed to you know, put facts on the ground, as we say. So I do believe that we could have done something, or you could say with the Abraham Accords were signed, you know, in the spring. So you don't annex in July and August, but you can annex in September, October. You could annex after Trump lost the election. The election was at the beginning of November, and he was still in power until January 20th. I was hoping that that would be a window of opportunity where Israel would be able to apply sovereignty, and then Trump would recognize it, which would then be very hard for the next president to undo. That wasn't done either. So I don't know. Now, Barry, I see you asked a question about the stance of Hezbollah, and Hezbollah doesn't talk a lot, but as I said, they have been, they did send rockets last night, that artillery that did not fall in Israel, that they kind of goofed and it fell in their own territory in Lebanon. But it's definitely a fear that Hezbollah has lost a lot in the civil war in Syria. They were heavily invested there. They lost a lot of their fighters and a lot of their equipment. So they're not in as good shape as they were. And more importantly, Lebanon today is extremely unstable, and there is growing, especially since that explosion in the port there in Beirut, there is growing antagonism to Hezbollah. So that's also something that might be kind of restraining Hezbollah from getting involved full scale here. But there's no question the Israeli army is on high alert along our northern border right now.
Any more questions? Jean, I see Jean's hand up.
Hello. Hello, yes. I would like to ask Sondra, she said that Netanyahu did not impose sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. Why did he not do that?
Well, that's what we're not sure, because there were people who said that he was afraid to jeopardize the Abraham Accords, or that he didn't have full backing from the Trump administration, that Jared Kushner was working against it. And it's not clear because we do not have all the facts. And so it's impossible. I personally believe that he could have at least applied limited sovereignty in certain places and gotten away with it. But it's one of the things that we pause and we question what really is going on there. What is going on?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for today.
You're welcome. Well, thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much, and blessings to you and to your country.
Thank you. Oh, Diane, I see you would like to ask a question.
I would. And I really want to thank you, but especially you've helped me to know how we should pray. We know how to pray for Israel, but how to pray about the election. You've shed a lot of light on that. And I understand what you're saying and believe that's spot on, and I didn't see it before. And I just thank you, because we have a Friday prayer meeting for Israel and the nations, and we need to muscle in on that. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you,
Good.
Diana. One thing I'd like to suggest, by the way, this Zoom meeting has been recorded and it will be uploaded to YouTube probably this evening or tomorrow. And then we will send out a link by email to all those who registered. So if you, Diana, in your prayer group or any of you others are praying for Israel, this might be something that you want to show to the people in the prayer group to help educate all of them as to how to better pray for Israel.
We're already having Sunday night recordings and meetings for Israel as well.
Excellent.
There's a lot happening, actually.
Good. I'm very glad to hear that.
Gordon has, and Song also has, Gordon has a question, but I was just going to say on prayer, Sondra, Cynthia Lothan, who's on this Zoom, has said just as there are 4,000 missiles coming over, there are 4,000 and more prayer missiles going up.
Yeah, amen, amen.
Brilliant.
I tell you. And
Amen.
so Gordon and then Song had
just
questions.
very quickly, could you repeat that book that you recommended before about the Palestinian background?
Okay. I'm going to actually also write it in the chat.
Yeah.
So you can see it.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
It's called From Time Immemorial.
From Time Immemorial.
by
Thank you.
Joan Peters.
Thank you.
Song.
Okay.
Yes, I would just like to, Shalom from Scotland, Sondra.
Oh, hello.
Yes, hi. Now, we met in Jerusalem, my wife and me. That was great. And I think
right.
I just want you to add how useful that to be able to show this recorded video to those who don't know, because my real interest in this area just started when attending your presentation in Edinburgh.
Oh, wow.
You know?
Wow.
Well, that one goes back 5 years. And so the Lord has been leading me, deeper and deeper into the Tanakh about the restoration of Israel. I can find loads of evidence, biblical evidence, for the annexation.
Of course.
Yes.
Yes.
That's what I'm focusing on.
Right.
Teaching the Bible believing folks. Thank you.
Absolutely. And that's actually what, if we look, when we first started Christian Friends of Israeli Communities, it was not my idea. I, at the time, didn't know very much about Christians who loved Israel. It was the idea of an evangelical Christian from America. And the idea was that, there was all this biblical basis for the Jewish claim to the land of Israel, to the whole of Israel. And he wanted to educate Christians about this and connected with me. I had been involved with educating Jews and the press and all kinds of people about this. But while I felt very strongly the biblical basis for me was the most important basis, most of the people I met until that point didn't care about the Bible. So I could talk about the Bible, but it didn't mean anything to them. And then when I started meeting Christians, and I realized here is a real basis of partnership, because we both understand the true basis for all of this, not just strategic and historical, modern history and all that, but it goes back so many thousands of years and with this very strong biblical foundation. And when I actually started this organization in 1998, initially it was this family project and I was involved with it, but then we turned it into an organization in 1998. And ever since then, this is what our mission has been, to reach out to Christians and present the biblical mandate, which is the most important foundation. After that, you can fill in with all the rest. What's really happening in the strategic issues and everything else is also very important. But let's start with the biblical foundation. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Geraldina's just saying that book is currently $75 US.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. I have a copy, Geraldina.
But you know what? Check on Kindle, because it's possible you could get it cheaper on Kindle. I don't know. I really don't know. And it may even also be in public libraries. It's an old book. I have a copy somewhere.
Yeah.
I don't even know where anymore, somewhere on my bookshelves. But yeah, it is an old book, but it is still out there. So definitely $75 is a ridiculous amount. Look on eBay. It could be somebody selling it and you can get it for $5. You know.
One more question from
Yes.
Yvonne, I see. If you could,
Yeah, if this book is quite rare, you know, if there's not many copies, then even on eBay it could be quite expensive. But if anyone was prepared to type it up, it's probably not copyright anymore, and might be able to be put online.
Oh, look at this. So Jane Castles found it for £25.
£25 isn't too bad,
That's a
is
lot
it?
cheaper.
But
I might
it's
look into that. It'd be good if it was online and everybody could get it.
it's a huge book, though. It's a huge
it?
book.
It's a big
Oh,
book.
dear.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
Big
Reverend Torrance, David Torrance used to lend me his copy, but I didn't go through all of it though. It's a big book.
Right. Okay.
Okay. All right. Anyway, I think, oh, here, Philip. Oh, Phil. I just see you, Bren. Hello. How are you?
Hi. Hi.
Good. I just saw your hand waving. Okay. I think, oh, did you want to say something, Phil?
Just very, very quickly, regarding the annexation of Judea and Samaria, if we go back to the British Mandate and the coins that were minted, on the coins itself, like coins are not affected by emotion. Coins are coins. What is written is written. And on the coin, it has Palestine in Arabic, Palestine in English, and the transliteration Palestine in Hebrew. But tellingly, alongside, as you know, the transliteration of Palestine in English, in brackets is the Aleph and the Yod and the two flying commas, which means Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. So although you have Palestine written there, it doesn't say the land of Palestine, but it does say the land of Israel. So therefore, the land perhaps hasn't got to be annexed. As you said, sovereignty has to be applied because it is already under international law and written on the coin as Eretz Israel.
Absolutely. Good point. And I have somewhere a copy of a postage stamp from Mandatory Palestine, and that there it says also the Aleph Yud Eretz Israel in Hebrew, and it's the only thing it says in Hebrew. And then it says Palestine in English. So yes, that's how it was known in those years. The British recognized that it was the land of Israel, 100%.
And they betrayed. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a different issue.
well,
All right. Anything? I think we're gonna call it quits. Joy, you have something?
all unmute. Can we all unmute and just say thank you and hello, goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sandra. Thanks, Sandra.
Great.
Bye. Bye.
Love it.
Let's see.
Hello.